In this tutorial, I want to start, as I so often do, with a little piece of anatomy. We're talking about core strengthening exercises, and we're going to be talking about four techniques that you need to include. And we're going to be quickly talking about this thing called super stiffness and how it's created. So I've just put sort of two examples on here. Obviously, there are more, but just to highlight super stiffness and how it's created, and then we'll talk about the four different techniques. So what we've got are longer muscles and shorter muscles. Now, longer muscles, like latissimus dorsi, they enhance stiffness of the core over large areas. So you can see on here, you've got the latissimus dorsi, you've got the actual muscle, which basically spans let's just say the entire back, because you've got where it joins in to the thoracolumbar fascia down here, and obviously this will be happening on the other side as well, but the muscle itself sort of covers, let's just say, from the lower back up to the upper back. So that's creating stiffness over that large area. Then we've got shorter muscles, and I'm using the example of the QL, the quadratus lumborum. So that then increases efficiency of the larger muscles. So in the past, when I've talked about getting all muscles to work together and creating muscle balance and things like that, this is the thing that I'm talking about. It's getting these muscles working together, because the QL, although it's only this lower portion of the spine here, it's helping and enhancing the stiffness that's created through the latissimus dorsi over this large area. And then there will be other muscles that will cover here, other muscles that will cover here, so on and so forth. So it's a bit like a big puzzle where they're all sort of like sort of matching together, fitting together, and then they are creating the whole that is greater than the sum of its parts, because each of these muscles will create their own little piece of stiffness, but you add them all together and the sum of that is greater than each of the parts on their own. So what we're going to do now is we're now going to talk about the four different techniques that you need for greater core strengthening. Technique number one is abdominal bracing. Now, this is important because it co-contracts all the three layers. So as I mentioned with regards to the anatomy, you've got the latissimus dorsi, which will be a superficial layer on the outside, and then you've got QL, which would be a deeper layer because it's much closer to the spine. So it co-contracts these layers of the core. You would go as deep as transverse abdominis, then you've got the erector spinae group, the QL, obliques, rectus abdominis, you've got the lats, the traps, so on and so forth. So we've got the abdominal brace that co-contracts all the three different layers. We've also then got, it creates that super stiffness that I was talking about. So when you lock all those muscles together, that locks down the core, stabilizes the spine, and that will enhance the exercise that you're doing. So even if it's just doing a simple plank, if you lock everything down, it's going to enhance that exercise. It's going to enhance the core strengthening because you'll be able to hold the exercise for longer, so on and so forth. So it's a bit like a sort of a chicken and an egg thing. And then the final one is that it gives you muscle balance. So when you've got all of those muscles working together, you don't get, let's just say, extra contraction at the front or at the left or at the right or whatever it may be. It's all locked down, it's all compressed in, and it's evenly distributed. So that is part number one, or technique number one, is abdominal bracing, because it co-contracts the three layers, it creates super stiffness, and it gives you muscle balance. Technique number two is endurance. So we've locked everything down, we've got all those bits and pieces in place, all the muscles are being efficient and creating that super stiffness that we've talked about. What we've then got to do is be able to hold that for a longer period of time. So the endurance part of it is just the ability of the muscles to resist fatigue, be able to hold a posture for longer, because if we are doing repetitive bending, if we are sat down for long periods of time, or even stood for long periods of time in a stationary position, that stress will build up on the spine, and it will start to diminish the stability of the spine, the ability of the core to work properly. So if we want to build core strengthening, if we want to lift heavier weight, then we need the core to be able to keep doing that over that session that we're doing it, or over that period of time that we are sat down, stood up, because it all, in some respects, works together. Because we aren't all professional athletes, we don't train for the day. We're at work for the day, we're doing our job, which might be sitting, standing, moving around, whatever it might be. Then we'll go to the gym and we'll try to enhance the core strengthening. But if we have a lack of endurance, our core is diminished before we even get to the gym if we're doing it at the end of the day, if that makes sense. So core endurance is important because it just resists the fatigue that could either build up during the session or build up during the day. And then the knock-on effect onto that is it then reduces the risk of injury because we aren't diminishing the ability of the spine to hold its posture or hold its position, for example. So when it comes to endurance, the reason we need those two things is because you can hold the posture for longer, so you can hold then therefore the exercise for longer, be it a core exercise like a plank, side plank, or pull-off press, whatever it might be, or it's a deadlift, a press, a pull, a pull-up, whatever the exercise is, a carry. Our body is able to do that, which then in turn reduces our risk of injury because the muscles and the structures of the spine can hold that posture for longer. The third technique is good movement. Now, what we're aiming to do with this is, now that as we've talked about in techniques 1 and 2, we've locked down the core, we've gained that endurance, so our body is able to hold the posture. Now what we're doing is we're now putting in good movement. Now, a part of that is, number one, it uses muscles of the limbs. Muscles of the limbs are designed to move. They're bigger, they're more powerful. They surround ball and socket joints, which are freely movable joints, which have large ranges of movement. The spine is different. It's a cartilaginous joint, slightly movable joint. It can move, but it's not its primary function, and certainly not under high load. So if it is deadlift, squat, whatever it is, the spine wants to be locked down in position, and then we use the glutes, the quads, the hamstrings to be able to lift that weight back up. And that is going to enhance core strengthening because the spine essentially is doing what it's built to do, and that's be rigid and be held in position by the muscles of the core, which is then going to enhance the core muscles because they're doing their job. This also maintains stiffness, so if we were to then get our core locked down, our spine then move, that then breaks the locked down nature of the abdominal brace, and it diminishes that super stiffness that we talked about. So if we have the lats and the QL and the lumbar spine suddenly moves, it will then diminish what the latissimus dorsi and the QL are trying to do. And the third thing is it spreads load. So if we are pushing big weights, that load gets concentrated or can get concentrated. If we have the spine in good position, if we are moving from the hips, then it's going to be much easier to concentrate that load where it needs to go. Around the spine, it's then going to be spread more evenly all the way around. So all of the force and the load is coming from, say, glutes and quads, a little bit of hamstrings as well. And then the spine is in its neutral posture, locked down with the abdominal brace that we've talked about, creating that super stiffness, which is then spreading all of the load that's potentially coming down through, if we've got the bar on the back, that's coming down through, and spreading that load more evenly, so it's not then going to aggravate the spine. And then number 4 is errors that people make. One is training single muscles, so sit-ups, crunches, side bends, twists. Training those single muscles, people think that if they get a strong rectus abdominis, it's going to give them, sort of a stronger core when they brace. This isn't necessarily the fact, if you will. It's much more effective to train abdominal bracing and super stiffness in that neutral posture because it's going to give you that greater strengthening and greater stability through the torso. The other thing is hollowing, so drawing the navel in. That's said to activate transverse abdominis, but again, it's a single muscle, and the transverse abdominis doesn't stabilize the spine. In some respects, it will actually diminish the stability of the spine if you're doing it that way. The abdominal brace that creates super stiffness locks the spine in position, locks all the sort of, let's just say, the vertebra and the discs in position, and then allows you to lift heavier weight if that's what you're choosing to do. The final thing is that you then can move higher loads, because essentially what you're doing is you're locking everything into position. The muscles are doing their job through the core, like we've talked about, and the muscles of the hips are then, or the muscles of the limbs, I should say, are then able to do their job, which is move the body. And then what you are then getting is essentially a much stronger, but also much more efficient use of your body. So you'll be able to lift more weight for less effort, for example. So those are the 4 things that you need to be able to strengthen your core. So we were talking about abdominal bracing. We were also talking about muscular endurance. Then it was good movement. And then we just looked at a few errors that some people can make. So make sure you're using the abdominal brace, creating the super stiffness, building core endurance, and creating good movement. So many thanks for watching. My name is Chris from Chris for Whole Training. I will speak to you in the next tutorial.